Welcome into another Soccer Down Here player profile as we get to know the USL Super League ahead of kickoff. We're going to talk to Jenny Vetter today of Spokane. Jenny, thanks for the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I wanted to just start with the very basics of how you got into soccer first as a kid.
hmm Yeah, so I feel like a lot of people, like my older sister, played, and so obviously I wanted to be just like her. So, starting all the way down to like the YMCA, just co-ed soccer, like when you're 5 and 6, and then me and my sister kind of continued to play. She's a couple years older than me, so kind of always wanting to follow in her footsteps. And then played throughout, the youth levels and club and high school and kept going. So,
Is there anything about those days as a young player that stands out to you today that helped kind of get you to where you are?
yeah, I think like one of like everyone has always been in those, weekend tournaments where you're playing 2, 3 games a day for 2 or 3 days at a time. And I think looking back on those moments when you're like hot, tired, dead, but you're just having so much fun because you're with your teammates, I think that's something that I'll always hold so special to me because there are times that like as a kid you're not really recognizing how hard it is, but all those little details just add up and make you kind of hardened and used to that kind of work. So
Was there somebody that kind of grabbed your attention, that maybe from the women's national team or on the men's side, just a player that you tried to emulate or model in your game?
Mhm. Yeah, so I would say growing up it was like always Alex Morgan. I mean, she's just such a classic. But players like Kristen Press and Tobin Heath, I always loved watching too. They're just as wingers, and I'm a winger, so really people I looked up to in the sense of what they were doing on the pitch. And yeah, I would say those three.
When you think back to the process that led you to Minnesota State, kind of how did it go? Did you see yourself playing in college, and how did you end up there?
Yeah. So Minnesota State is actually my hometown university. So growing up, I definitely always wanted to play in college, and I was lucky enough to have at the time the MSU assistant coach as my club coach. So that's kind of how that connection started, and I was able to be coached by him, and a lot of those same playing styles were implemented at the club level. And then it just came down to staying in my hometown and wanting to be like have that support from my family and the community. And yeah, so just kind of ended up being the right fit, even just with it being a few miles down the road. So
How important was that time there to where you are today?
yeah, I think it was so special. I think my career could have gone a lot of different ways, but I think it was the perfect fit for me in the sense that it allowed me to grow tremendously as a player and as a person, and to kind of feel supported in that environment. And it's a Division II school, so it was the right balance of academics and athletics for me personally.
We always try to highlight how important it is that just because it is D1 or D2, D3, the level of talent is still there. What has it been like for you to really see, I think, a growth in people acknowledging more of the talent that is there in NAIA, D3, D2, and anything like that?
Yeah, I think we've moved in a really positive direction in that aspect. I think obviously, the youth system is really catered towards like go D1, go D1. But I think once you get past that initial like kind of predisposition, I think people are a lot more open to it. Especially like we see so many good players in the NWSL who've taken different routes and paths. Bethany Balser is of course one that is easy to call up. She was NAIA. And I think the more players that make that jump, the more that people will realize that there's good players everywhere. It's just about finding them and giving them the resources to be able to play at the next level.
As your senior year was winding down, and you were kind of thinking about what would be next for you, as a person, but also as a soccer player, were you thinking about continuing to play? What was that looking like?
Yeah, I think at the time, I actually did not think I was going to keep playing. You just don't hear many stories of people continuing to play, especially at the Division II levels. There's always a few that kind of make it out, quote unquote. But I was going to be content with like going into a career. And but then as kind of my senior season wound down, I was like, this is not something that you can go back to always. And so kind of taking that leap of faith, and went to a couple NWSL tryouts, and that's kind of how my process professionally started, I would say.
How did the opportunity come about to play in Portugal?
Yeah, so obviously, I think I knew the next step for me personally would be to go overseas, and kind of get that next level of development and just a year of experience being a professional. And I was really lucky to have my agent, Gabriel Chapman, who found the opportunity for me and kind of negotiated with that club and a few others, of course. Yeah, and it just that one was the right one. So
What was the level of the league like, and how did the experience there improve your game?
yeah, I think the Portuguese league is really interesting. I think it's a league that's growing a lot, especially with the way that we're being represented in the Champions League with Benfica, and now obviously Sporting is going to be there this year, and obviously Benfica had a tremendous run last year, and so I think that only bodes well for the league. There is quite a bit of parity, from 1 to 12, but I think for the most part, it's pretty competitive. And I think it was a good league to get into as it's growing. And I think it'll continue to grow a lot.
I'd love to pick your brain too, just about the balance as a player between the individual. You mentioned the technical side, obviously the physical side of the game, but then that tactical
Mhm.
element too. And with your experience in Portugal, was it different? Was it something that was a diff like was training different? Was the
Mhm.
way that the coaching staff wanted you guys to play, was that different? And does that help you to come back here into a different environment?
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like I have kind of a different experience just because I ended up on a team that honestly fit my personal playing style really well. I am fast. I like to go on the counter. I like to press, all those things, and that team, my Portugal team, really matched my playing style. And trainings were very much like soccer is soccer at the end of the day. So kind of what I was used to, and so now coming here, I'm really glad to be challenged more so in the tactical sense of like you are going to be doing something a little bit differently. So I think um, kind of having the confidence of last season in Portugal of like getting my feet under me and getting that first year as a professional, gaining confidence, and now I can come back here and learn and really grow.
What led you back to the States and Spokane specifically in the USL Super League?
Yeah, I think being overseas for a year, it definitely makes you appreciate the soccer landscape in America and like the resources that we do have. As I said, Portugal's growing, but I think as with a lot of European leagues, there's a lot of more growth to be had. And it's kind of being like, okay, well, do I want to be experiencing growth pains, or do I want to be in a system that knows what's right, what's wrong, and how to do things and how to provide resources for players? So I think that was a huge thing for me of wanting to be back in the States, as well as just being closer to friends and family and that sort of thing.
It's interesting, especially, you went to Portugal, played professionally there, and now coming back and being a part of the Super League. What was that initial call like for you when you were in Portugal playing with this team, then getting that call from Spokane and saying, "Hey, we want you to be a part of this." What was that whole experience like?
Yeah, it was just so exciting. At first, I think a lot of people didn't know what the Super League was going to be, and I think there was a lot of uncertainty of like, is this a stable thing? Is it trying to be the NWSL? And I think they've made it really clear that like we can both be successful and we can both, have a space. There's plenty of demand for soccer to go around. And so I think for me getting the call, it was like a huge opportunity to come home and play in front of an American crowd and continue to grow soccer. Um, you know, Soccer or football, I should say, is the sport in Europe. And so you're always going to have that support around teams. And so I think now to come back home and to kind of realize that you can be a part of that in America is really cool.
As you get ready for your first season in Spokane, I know the team is coming together and the players are coming together. Starting from scratch is always fascinating. What are your goals individually and kind of as a group going into this year?
Hmm. Yeah, I think for me personally, coming back here, it's really about elevating my game. I wanted to be in a team that I'm surrounded by great players and I'm challenged every day, both by them and my coaches. And I think I found that in Spokane. So for me, I'm just looking to really elevate my game in possession, defensively, cleaning everything up technically. And that's kind of like, not a numbers goal. You can't really quantify it well, but I think that focusing on that stuff will obviously lead to goals and wins and all of that. And I think as a team, we're still trying to find our identity and find out what those goals are. But we're full of competitors, and obviously, we're going to go out there every time trying to win.
What has it been like for you, I think, being with Spokane to really getting to know a lot of the new players that have come in because it's starting brand new. It's a brand new team from like the ground up. What has it been like learning some of your new teammates and learning what they do and kind of feeling it out with each other?
Yeah, I think it's so cool because we have so many different journeys and experiences on the team. And I think that's really helpful in like getting us to bond and relate to each other. Like, oh, well, you were in Sweden with this player who I know from, like there's a lot of those connections where you don't know them individually, but you know people in common because the soccer world is so small. And so I think just us having a diverse history and backgrounds has helped us really connect to each other. And I think we have a great group so far, and everyone is super talented. And it's just about putting those talents in the right spaces with the right people around them. So yeah, I'm incredibly excited for our season and how we kind of evolve as a group.
What is the one thing you're looking forward to when getting the Super League started, starting that schedule, and like almost being like you are one of the first, like being a part of this. And so what are you most excited for when you're starting out and getting ready for this season?
Yeah, I'm super pumped for our home opener. We're really lucky to be home for that opening weekend. The Spokane Velocity, which is our men's side, has had great turnouts at their games, and are averaging between 4,000 and 5,000 people a match and selling out our stadium. So I'm really looking forward to that first game and like being a part of the history of like we're one of the first teams to host a game in the league. So.
It's interesting, especially hearing about your journey with the sport and then hearing other people's who end up going to Super League or go to NWSL. It's really grown, especially in the women's soccer aspect here in the States. We've seen a big jump in where young players can go if they want to play professionally. It, like you mentioned, doesn't have to just be overseas now.
Yeah.
What has it been like to watch that really grow and develop since you started when you were younger to now being a part of a new league that's starting here for women's soccer?
Yeah. I think like obviously when I was younger, obviously the NWSL existed and they were playing and performing at a high level, but it was never something that as a kid I watched or knew about, right? My parents didn't play soccer, and so it's not like the NFL where it's like, oh well, this is my dad's favorite team, so I'm gonna watch them this weekend. You know what I mean? So I think now seeing that transition to there's games every weekend that young players can watch. And now it's really going to be year round with kind of the two schedules overlapping a little bit. And we're going to be on a major streaming service with Peacock. And I think the accessibility of people being able to watch these leagues is only going to help soccer grow and inspire more people to take the next step of keeping to play. So.
I think you can speak to this with your experience coming from D2, and Maddie and I get involved with schools in the Georgia area, D3 and an AIA, and there's top players everywhere.
Mhm.
How important is it in your mind to the next generation for this league and all of these new teams and these opportunities to exist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just got chills when you said that actually, because I know so many good players who don't think that there's something for them, and they don't continue playing because they don't want to go to Europe, or they don't want to leave the States. And so I think now having 8 more teams and probably 10 or 12 next year in the Super League, I think that's so huge for just providing more opportunities for players to stay home and continue their careers. Even in Portugal, there's how many Americans per team? At least, 2 to 4. So you're talking about the enormous amount of players that are in Europe that have the skill and the ability to play in the US. And now that there's way more opportunity, I think it's fantastic.